Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best supports for patch 5.24. So first up is going to be Trundle. Right now, Trundle is being played a lot in the top lane, and he's got one of the higher win rates in the game right now. He's also a pretty strong support in my opinion. If the enemy team does have a tanky champion, let's say they've locked a Nasus in, or they've locked a Rammus, I would definitely recommend playing Trundle, because once you get to those mid to late game team fights, you're going to be able to use your ultimate on those targets, and then you're just going to be pretty much unkillable because you're going to steal their stats. You're going to get their armor and magic resist stats, and it's just going to make him pretty much unkillable in mid to late game team fights. So I would recommend picking him in that situation for sure. He's got great peel as well with his E. It provides the knock up right when you use it, and then it gives a crazy like 3 or 5 second slow, which is just really strong for keeping your AD carry safe. He also has pretty good damage for a support. His Q does pretty good damage, and then after he uses his Q, his auto attacks will do more damage because of the passive on his Q. So overall, he does have some pretty good damage for a support. And he is really strong against all-in bot lanes as well, because let's say the enemy team has a Leona or something who's going to try to dive in on your AD carry. He can just put his pillar up, and then the enemies really won't be able to do anything because they're going to be slowed, they're going to be knocked up, and then your AD carry can just disengage really nicely. A few cons to him though is that he's kind of weak against he's kind of weak in the early game because he really doesn't have an all-in ability. He can't really engage with anything unless he can catch the enemies out with his E. And he is weaker if the enemy team does not have a tank, because then he can't get those tank stats by using his ultimate, and then he is a little bit weaker. So I would definitely recommend playing him if the enemy teams do have a tank, but if they don't, then I would recommend playing one of the other supports on my list. Next up is going to be Thresh. So Thresh is just always going to be a very strong support for solo queue as long as you can play him correctly. He's got great crowd control with his Q, his E, and his ultimate. His peel is really strong as well with his ultimate and his lantern. I think that if you're a really good Thresh player, then you can save your AD carry in so many different situations, and your AD carry can just play a lot more aggressive when you've got a Thresh on your team, since he's got his lantern, and as long as the Thresh knows how to position correctly in team fights, then his AD carry is just going to be really safe, and it's going to be hard for them to ever get caught out. He's got great pick potential as well with his Q. He does have pretty good damage for support as well. With the passive he's got on his E, he can do some pretty good auto attack damage in the early game, and then his ultimate also does some pretty good damage as well. He's also great at setting up ganks due to his lantern. I don't see Thresh players do this enough, like lane gank for their jungler. I feel like you really want to do this when you're playing as Thresh. Like, let your jungler know that he can lane gank, and you're gonna throw him the lantern, and then you can set up a gank like that, because those ganks are just really effective, and I really don't see them enough from Thresh players. He gets the free AP and armor on his passive as well, so that just allows him to scale really nicely into the mid to late game. And one con to Thresh though is that he's a little bit harder to play in my opinion compared to some of the other supports in the game. Next up on my list, I have Brand. So Brand is probably one of the most annoying supports in the game to play against, maybe other than Soraka. The amount of damage that he can put out in the early game is pretty crazy with his W. If you can just hit 2 Ws on the enemy AD carry in the laning phase, they're going to be chunked down to around half HP, and then after that, you're just going to be able to zone them out of the laning phase. So as long as you can hit your skill shots on Brand, he can be a very rewarding support. He doesn't really have any strong peel or disengage though. He's only got this single target stun, so if your team is lacking disengage, or if your team is lacking a tank, I wouldn't recommend picking Brand. However, if your team does need damage, I would definitely recommend picking him, because when I play Brand support, I find that I am out damaging my laners most of the time, so that's pretty crazy. And yeah, if your team does need some damage, I would definitely recommend playing him. He's also great with the Frost Queens. It just allows him to get a lot of gold in the early game, because his W just allows him to proc that really easily, and then the active on it is really nice for him as well, since he really doesn't have any strong peel in his kit, and the slow that he does get from the active just allows him to keep his AD carry a little bit safer. And a few cons to Brand though are that he does not have any strong peel, and he is also pretty skill shot reliant with his W and his Q. Next up on my list I have Soraka. So Soraka is just so annoying to play against because of her heals. If you are playing against Soraka in the laning phase, then what I would recommend to do is try to focus her instead of the enemy AD carry. I see too many people trying to focus the enemy AD carry in the laning phase, and then Soraka just ends up healing them to full HP. Unless you do have an all-in bot lane, then just focus the Soraka, because then you're just going to be able to take her out a lot easier, and it's just going to be easier to take out the Soraka than it is going to be to take out the enemy AD carry. I would also recommend taking Ignite if you are going up against Soraka on the support, because then she's not going to be able to heal for as much if you do Ignite the target. So just use those two little tips to beat Soraka in the laning phase, because she is definitely one of the stronger laners in the game. Her AoE silence is also really strong for team fighting. If you can place that in the correct position in a team fight, then it can definitely win you a team fight. And she does also have decent poke with her Q in the laning phase. A few cons to her though is that she is very squishy in the early game, so it is pretty easy to kill her. I would try to play like an all-in support against a Soraka, like a Thresh or a Blitzcrank, or someone that can catch her out in the early game, because she is very squishy and she is very easy to burst down in the laning phase. And she also doesn't have any strong engage or disengage in her kit, so if your team is lacking that, then I would recommend picking one of the other supports on my list. And to round out the top 5 for this video, I have Jana. So right now, Jana has the highest win rate for any support in the game, and that's mainly because we're seeing a lot of all-in assassins being played right now, like Rengar, Zed, Talon, Yasuo, and Jana is just a really good pick against those champions, since she can completely negate their engage with her ultimate, and then if they try to re-engage after you've used your ultimate, then you can just use your Q and your W. So the amount of disengage that you provide for your team with Jana is pretty crazy. And if your team is lacking disengage, I would definitely recommend picking her. She's also great with the Frost Queen's item, and her shield is really strong for the laning phase as well. You're pretty much guaranteed to win the trade whenever you do place your shield on the AD carry, unless they're really stupid or something, but as long as you can use your shield in the right situation as Jana in the laning phase, then you can have a very strong laning phase. And a few cons to her though is that she does have a weaker engage compared to some of the other supports in the game, so if you are lacking engage and not disengage, then I would play a support like Thresh or Blitzcrank instead of Jana. And she also does rely on her AD carry, because she doesn't have that pick potential of some of the other supports in the game, so she's just there to keep her AD carry safe. And if your AD carry doesn't play aggressive and they don't and they're just too scared during team fights, then Jana won't be able to provide as much for her AD carry as she would if they were playing more aggressive. So first up on the honorable mentions, I have Nami. Nami is a really strong heal support. She's also really good with the Frost Queen's item right now, so if you're looking for a strong disengage support as well, and if you're just looking for a good laner, then I would recommend playing Nami. Next up, I have Bart. So Bart is really annoying to play against in the laning phase, because he can put out a lot of damage with his Q and with his auto attacks. He also does scale pretty well into the mid to late game once he does pick up those meeps, and he can actually do pretty good amounts of damage in the mid to late game as well. His ultimate is really good for just picking out the enemies if they are caught out of position, and if you do find yourself getting ahead with Bard, then you can use your ultimate to just end up snowballing the game. So I do think Bard is a little bit harder to play than some of the other supports in the game, but he is very rewarding if you can play him correctly. Next up, I have Blitzcrank. So Blitzcrank is a very strong engage support. He's got a really good early game as long as you can hit your hook on him. If you can't hit your hook though, and if you find yourself missing it often, then he is definitely a little bit weaker than some of the other supports in the game, but just one good hook in the mid to late game can just end up winning your team the game. So I think for that reason, Blitz is a really good support for solo queue. And to round out the honorable mentions for this video, I have Braum. So Braum is just an overall solid tank support. He's got really strong CC with his Q and with his ultimate, and he's just got really strong peel with his ult and with his W and his E as well. So if you're just looking for a really tanky support and a support that can peel for his AD carry really nicely, then I would recommend playing Braum. So that is all for the video, guys. If you did enjoy, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.